there you go.
And Austin, I don't have my laptop with me today, so is the agenda on the,
Meeting schedule, we're doing the meeting schedule. and then
Jumping right into.
so do we need to like approve?
You will need to adopt your
Meetings.
schedule. I can share it on the screen. In well, actually, this doesn't work.
I have my laptop.
That's okay. Mr. Lavelle's gonna
Okay, you
help me
can look
out.
off this screen, okay.
Gee, back to my days. What?
Brings you back to your, oh, cheating, nice.
Kelly, I'm good when you are.
Give me a second.
You're fine, just letting you know.
All kind of stuff going on.
You know what, though, I can at least get started.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. All right. I call the Marvin Planning Board meeting on October the 17th to order. We have a quorum. Thank you, sir. We have a quorum, and we do not have a regularly scheduled agenda today, but we are going to be doing UDO. So, well, I mean, we've got UDO. We're not doing like, no, we don't have any folks.
You need to still to adopt your agenda.
Yep. I'm getting there. Does anyone have any changes, updates, or questions about the agenda? Wow, okay, can't look at that, I know. If there are no changes, if we could someone could make a motion to adopt.
So moved?
All in favor? Aye. All right, so moved. All right, and now, we don't need to do there are no speakers, like,
Well, you still have the previous minutes to adopt.
it's not on our agenda.
It's right under adoption of the agenda. Adoption of previous minutes.
Not on mine.
Are we on the wrong one?
It must be. Here, we're going on one. Today is the 17th, right?
Yes,
Scroll up.
all day.
Oh, it's up there. Okay, sorry.
Did you call to order?
I did call to order.
Okay.
My
We've
technical
adopted
support
the
is confident.
agenda. All right, now we need to,
ITL for that, that's terrible.
now we need to adopt the previous minutes. Does anyone have any changes, comments, questions about the previous minutes?
No.
All right, if anyone would like to make a motion to approve?
Make a motion that we approve the previous meeting minutes?
Second?
Second.
Just looking at you, John. You're just gonna second. And all in favor?
Sorry, I was looking at the name. You're right.
All right, so moved. And do we have anyone online for public comment? Because there's no one in the room.
In person to participate.
Okay, perfect.
No one's here.
Perfect. We're skipping over then the public comment since there is no one. And we're going to move right into our first item of discussion.
Your 2024 meeting schedule.
Yes, the meeting schedule. Okay. I have not had a chance to look at this. Has everyone had a chance to look at the meeting schedule?
So it is the same pattern as usual, third
Okay,
Tuesday of
so
each
no
month.
major changes?
Your only deviation is an additional meeting in March on the first Tuesday in the evening, and that's for your joint meeting with council.
Okay.
And that's the same day you normally do that each year.
Okay, perfect. Is everybody still good with 6 o'clock? That's what I want to also make sure. You okay over there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I was putting paper clips away. I was raised
All
by
right.
a frugal old man.
And we need to approve this, so,
If you don't have any changes, you'd need to do an emotion to adopt as presented.
okay. You know what? I'll make a motion to adopt as presented. How about that? Can I get a second?
Second.
This is like kind of loose and fast tonight.
Traffic threw you for a loop.
And all in favor of adopting the 2024 Planning Board meeting schedule? Say aye. All right, so moved.
You guys will
And
get
then-
calendar invites from me and probably tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Austin. And then now I'm just going to turn it over. Am I turning it over to you?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
All right, so just wanted to go over everything in front of you. So there should be a new Article 2 to replace the existing Article 2 that's in your binders. There should be Article,
Hey, Hunter?
Yeah.
I thought we were going to talk about remote attendance. Wasn't that on the agenda
That's
too?
up there, yes.
There's no one attending remotely other than Bob. So you
I thought we were going
Also thought it
I thought we were discussing the policy or no?
No.
Oh,
Because it was an item on there,
No,
yes.
there's a policy that if members want to participate remotely, that we have that in place. And if someone is wanting, if someone here needs to be remote, you all have to vote on that. Bob's not a member, so you
Oh,
don't have to.
I thought it was a discussion item for a change in the policy. Never mind.
You're good there.
Okay, so going back to this is, then there, you should have the first 4 pages of the streets chapter, and then the 3 new articles that will also be introduced tonight. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Rick.
Can you repeat that last thing you said? It was hard to understand.
So you should have 5 stacks of paper in front, or 5 stacks. A new Article 2 to replace all of Article 2. You should have the first 2, it's pages 1 through 4, but it's 2 sheets, because since it's double-sided, of the street chapter, which is what, Article 14? 13? And then you should then have Article 16, parking.
That would have been Article 12, the first
Article
4
12.
pages of Article 12.
Sorry, yes. The first 4 articles are Article 12. And then you should have 3 new articles for tonight, which are 13, 16, and 21. Yes. If you have in your old section, like any notes and stuff, what I do is I just leave the old one in behind it and just put a thumb note on it that says like old. But that's just me. I mean, if you don't have any notes, you're more than welcome to rip it out, trash it. It just, if you want to look at what's changed.
And I put a rip in mine, so I know they're junk after I finish.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, if people want paper clips, they should also have the 5. But is everybody clear on the 5 stacks you got? All right. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to get into the discussion for tonight.
Well, Chair, members of the board, and staff, as you can see, we're starting to get a little heavy into a lot of documents, a lot of management and things of that nature, and it's going to continue like this for several months. But I want to try to move as efficiently as we can. Anytime I'm moving too quickly, slow me down, okay, and we can go in depth where we need to. The replacement item for Article 2, there's a little bit of blue in there, a little bit of change. There's still some more change I need to make to it, so you'll see these things constantly improving as we have discussions and as I finish my task as well. The stuff, if you will, that goes in Article 12, it was a small change that triggered the 4 pages being replaced, and it's highlighted in blue for you. Based on some input and everything, wanted to edit that for you and point that out. So that Article 12, those changes appear just on page 2, but it pushed and shoved some paragraphs. So that's really all there is to do to go over those items. Unless there are any comments on 12, other comments. Those edits that you received today were from some of the comments at the introduction. Do we have any other comments on 12? Okay. Please know that we can come back to any and all of these as we proceed through the process. So that's 12. Now, the next one that we introduced last month is Article 17. We didn't have any feedback at that time to make any edits or tweaks or changes, but I wanted to find out if everybody's done their homework, read through there, had any questions or comments back on 17 at this time. I feel like that in the next couple of months, we're going to be having a big session where we're jumping all over the place in here to hit everybody's concerns or questions. All right, hearing none on 17, then I want to move on to the to kind of the new stuff. Article 11, which we had some discussion of last time, where I had thought we were going to lean on your old section heavily, but that turned out to be a mistake. I have mine in and submitted, but not ready for you. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about it, but you won't get it until the next meeting for your actual review. we want to go through a little bit, Hunter and I do, before we roll it out to you. But it's going to be I think, a more concise approach than what you've had in yours. But I did bring over into it a lot of the priorities and a lot of the goals and a lot of things of that nature that you've stated in your previous versions, so that we're carrying over those foundational statements and those foundational objectives completely. So you'll be seeing that for your next agenda, assuming that we get a chance to finalize any tweaks and adjustments at the staff and consultant level. So that kind of moved us along fairly quickly. So it will appear again as I'm going to call it an introduction, 11 will. I just wanted to make sure everybody's tracking along with the reading guide, that we didn't skip something, okay? We haven't skipped it by any means. These next 3 articles are kind of a BLT, I call it, the bacon, lettuce, and tomato of the zoning world. You know, the last one, the signs and landscaping and parking were the PB&J, if you want to separate out peanuts and butter. And I say that because they tend to go well together. They tend to fit together in their use and application, okay? This next one is really one that's probably hitting a lot more closer to home for you because you're largely a residential village, okay? You don't really have downtowns and commercial strips and commercial nodes and neighborhood commercial and all those relatively typical things you find in towns. That's why you're a village. So subdivisions are really that BLT's makeup. 13, 16, and 21, when pieced together as a between 2 slices of bread, are really the foundation for crafting subdivision development, okay? And I do use So, do you need a moment to get your new pages in? Okay. I do use 3 silos in this whole thing about what we'll call neighborhood development. I don't want to really call it subdivision development. I really would rather call it neighborhood development. Subdivision is really a process. It's not a place. Subdivision is the act of taking a larger tract and creating small home sites and building homes. They become neighborhoods. So in neighborhood development, the 3 critical pieces, the 3 really critical pieces, aside from the district use tables, things of that nature, where you might define, you know, whether there are other types of residential or whatever involved, those 3 are streets, the development or subdivision of those parcels and creating those streets, and the common or open space types of areas that are a part of the mix, okay? The lots that host the homes, that'll come later when we get to districts and we get to building types, okay? So, in the topic of streets, there's really 2 aspects that I want you to keep in mind. So over on this hand, I'm going to look at streets from the standpoint of a public space. They host not just your vehicles and everything, but also your infrastructure, your pedestrian componentry. They host your things like street lights, if that's important. They host things like street trees, if that's important. So there's this host of infrastructure, that I'll call it, that fit into this street place, this street world, okay? The other aspect of streets is really in the division of property and creating this connection that makes it possible for those new home sites to have that accessibility and that infrastructure and things of that nature. So that's more of that subdivision process of creating streets, not the construction process and the pavement and the what's in that right-of-way and what have you. So there's a couple different things going on, and that's why I'm going a little bit slow here, okay? There's a couple different things going on, and we try to keep them in these neat little silos so they're manageable for the persons that are using your ordinance, and that you get consistent results out the end of the pipeline as staff is reviewing, as this board is reviewing, anything like that is taking place. The third component, open space, fills in voids among those processes, okay? And we'll get into those each individually in just a moment. So, creating great neighborhoods is an important part of any development ordinance. It's an important part of a planning board's role. It's an important part of the foundational policy that's adopted by a village council. And it is the creator of the character of your community. This is where it's founded, creating neighborhoods. This is where it's foundational. So I want to start you in the physical side, and then we're going to bump over a little bit to the non-physical side, because in the topic of subdivisions in Article 16, I'm going to introduce it to you backwards, okay? Article 16 starts out with a little bit, well, maybe it's not just a little bit, but a lot of legal stuff that deals with the subdivision arena, okay? Legal stuff. But I don't want to start there. I want to start with the physical stuff, the actual neighborhood perspective. And so that is we're gonna sort of dive into first. So before we go to streets in 13, I want you to look at 16 for just a moment, okay? I want you to look at 16. And we're going to go to that fabric piece. I should have my page already turned. Sorry about that. It's on page 9 of 16, subdivision standards. We write it one way for the users, but I'm introducing it to you as the policymakers, a little bit different order, okay? And yeah, I think it'll come together in a moment. In subdivision standards, this is where we basically define that criteria that has to be addressed, regardless of really what district you're in. This is not going to talk about the lot size. That's going to appear in the individual districts. This district might have that standard, and this other district might have a different lot width or lot area or something like that. But this is the foundation for the standards and how it relates to the different physical attributes of creating properties and lots. One of the most critical pieces that I want to call your attention to is going to appear at the very top of the next page. When we're creating lots, we need to define some fundamental criteria that those lots need to meet that's not just dimensional. The top of page 10, because I want you to read through this at your leisure, but at the top of page 10, there are 3 items that separate this ordinance from yours very, very quickly, right away, from where you are today. And you'll see them listed there. These are prohibitions on lot lines for building lots. It doesn't mean that the farm can't be cut in two and follow the creek down the middle to give the daughter and the son each half of the farm. This is talking about building lots in subdivisions, these little acre lots that people are going to build a home on. The 3 items in that list typically lead to the greatest degree of confusion and I guess what's the best way to put it? innocent mistakes that happen out there. So I'm going to put on my reenactment actor hat again, and I'm going to be that guy that's going to Lowe's to pick up some paint, and I notice that they have a really good deal on a decorative fence I've been thinking about, and they have zero financing for me, which might not be important in Marvin. Yeah, nobody wants to be seen with zero financing, do they? And so I schedule up an installation of some fence around my backyard, because I've been thinking about it, and now's the time, the price is right, it's on sale. Well, they don't think about that here either, do they, right? I'm gonna get the fence. And under typical ordinances, they will say things like that buffers need to be shown on plats. Buffers along streams need to be shown on the final plat for the subdivision, right? That floodplains need to be shown on the final plat for the subdivision. And last but not least, any wetland areas need to be shown on the final plat. But when I got to Lowe's, I was going to get paint, and I forgot to bring my subdivision plat with me so that I could look and make sure I was complying with something that was put on my subdivision plat 14 years ago when the subdivision was recorded. So in my excitement, I buy the fence. They come out the next week and they install the fence. And Hunter goes by and he says, wait a minute, I got a call today from Union Utilities saying that somebody was putting a fence up across the sewer easement. So he calls the homeowner. And the homeowner's, what? You mean I can't put a fence around my yard? Well, there's an easement back there that the plat shows, and you can't put a fence across that easement. Plus, you've got a buffer area down here that you've cleared out when they put in the fence along the creek back at the back of your property. And you told me just now on the phone that you were going to put a play set down there, and we didn't know about that. The point is the snowball goes down the hill pretty quickly. And the citizen ends up having made a very innocent mistake that sounds like a very no-brainer type of topic or issue, to fence in your backyard because you got some new puppies this big. So, what I learned a long time ago, because I've been visited by federal agents representing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Anybody ever had a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers agent show up at your office? Yeah, exactly. Well, they wanted to know how in the world did those buffers get cleared out in that subdivision over there? And I said, well, those were done before I got in the picture in there. Well, blah, 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 blah. Well, it was shown on the plats. And everybody went in and cleared those buffers out and made their yards bigger. The point I want to make is that those three little limitations up there that are shown up front are all about basically saying to the developer, when you're laying out your subdivision, let's set your customers, your home buyers, up for success, not failure. And you're going to see this is going to appear in Article 21, that other part of this BLT, where these things dovetail nicely together. So these environmentally sensitive areas, floodplains, buffers, stream buffers, and wetlands are exacted from those building lots. So when I buy that new home and I'm sitting on the porch or patio or hardscape or pool house or whatever out back, and I point to my little pink flags, which is the color for property corners, and my family and I discussed, well, that's at the end of our property. We can't go down and clear out to the top of the bank of the creek. But if those pink flags are down by the creek, you bet your bippy they're going to want to clear that out and make it playable for the kids or the dogs or whatever they want to do. So we're trying to set people up for success. When we get to 21 and a little bit, open space, we also say those sewer lines that need to run from the street down to follow the creek for the outfall lines, anybody seen that in a neighborhood? I know you do. But wastewater flows in the same direction as natural streams. That we don't want those across private lots. So if you've got to leave the street with your pipeline to go down by the creek and then follow the interceptor line, that would be a piece of common open space that would go with the creek and with the buffer area. So that easement for that sewer line is not halfway on if I and the new intern, well, you're not an intern anymore, are you? You're an employee. I and the new employee live next door to each other. It's not half on my lot and half on her lot. To where my fence actually needs to be now 10 feet off my property line, not on my property line or along my property line. So those things all are aimed at creating a lot less stress and issue for a homeowner. And when that happens, it creates less stress for staff, which therefore creates less stress for the village council. See where I'm headed? So we're setting, pardon me? And there you go. So that's the reason for those. Those are three things that will change the makeup. So when we get into lot sizes and all that in districts, we want to keep those things in mind, okay?
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I think this is really smart. But what does this do to if a builder was bringing us a minor subdivision, a major subdivision, and their lot lines cannot include any of these three things, does it still count towards their by right, like 1 acre? So that's kind of what I'm a little confused about is.
It goes to the open space, which would count towards overall density, but would not count towards their minimum lot size, okay?
Okay.
So if your minimum lot size is 40,000 square feet, then you still have to have 40,000 square feet. So what that means to the developer is you're not eating all the crust on the pizza. You're not eating every bit of it. Land is not like pizza. You can't just slice the whole thing up. You're going to maybe stop the cul-de-sac a little sooner so that the lot has proper depth before you get down to the creek, which actually is going to reduce the cost to the developer for developing the property. So they start to see this as working out in their favor in the end, because the most difficult lots to develop are the ones that are usually at the edge of the streams, the creeks, the steep slopes, things of that nature. And I've seen surveyors and engineers when the client says, well, we got this 100-acre piece of property in Marvin, get me as many lots as you can. In other words, lay it out in all kinds of different ways to come up with the maximum yield for the same, on that same piece of property. And what this is saying to the design team is stop, whoa, right there. Whoa, right there. Because I can't tell you how many times I've been in developments and there have been lots that had no house on them because they were difficult to build. Because the cul-de-sac was pushed all the way to the brink. And so we're really trying to say, you know what, when it gets to the point where it's not really realistic to develop, please stop, okay? And so this establishes that criteria so that the outcome is a better outcome in the end.
A prime example of this is the Sage at Marvin. Those first two lots, I know we're not looking at the plat, but if you guys recall, there's two lots right when you actually enter that development on that plat that half of it is in the stream buffer. And I've told them I don't think that's going to be able to be developed, but they're on there. And I don't think they're going to be able to be developed. So this kind of that would stop that, because I really thought, and I recommended this, but there's really, once again, it complied, but the whole back portion of that lot's in the buffer. They're not going to be able to do anything. They're not going to be able to have a pool or any of that stuff. So they sell it, great, but for the most part, this would definitely help from a staff level, but at the same time, we could have had that nixed, and I would have had it in the ordinance to be like, hey, you can't do that.
Right. You can always blame the ordinance. Well, the ordinance won't let me do it. It's not that Hunter won't let them do it. The ordinance prohibits that. And it really, if you stop and think about this, again, I've said this before and we'll say it again. I'm not smart enough to do this stuff the hard way, so I try to use some common sense as much as often as I possibly can in coming up with solutions to problems that I've seen and experienced and dealt with time in and time again, from utilities being encroached upon to stream buffers being cut and cleared, all to floodplains covering a large part of a lot, so now they need a variance because the floodplain's using up the lot. Well, if they had to sort of work around those areas, the street layout might be a little different too, and it might yield a better quality neighborhood. And that's what I think is one of the key objectives here in Marvin, is top quality neighborhoods. So I wanted to point that out. The rest of this stuff in here gets into a lot of the real detail of laying out your subdivision, and you'll notice that. It gets into blocks, block dimensions and configurations. You may see some things in here that you say, well, gosh, we don't want to do this or we don't want to do that. And we can talk about those after you've read through them. Flag lots, I'm a big believer that you really have to limit flag lots so they don't become this tool or device to try to take advantage of squeezing one more lot in where it really doesn't make sense to. Because flag lots sometimes lead to first responder problems. You know, sometimes they can be difficult to access. I've seen that happen before as well. So we do limit those substantially. You may like them. You may want to change these numbers around, and we can talk about that, and I'll share with you what I see as being issues if we do, and but ultimately it will be your final say that we carry forward to the council. I want to turn the page to 12 because there's something else that sometimes when people first read it, they don't understand why in the world would I say something like cul-de-sacs being limited in length. A lot of times people used to say, well, you know, we don't want the fire truck to have to drive a quarter of a mile to finally turn around to get back out of the cul-de-sac if they made the wrong turn, or the ambulance or whatever. That's actually not my biggest point. Are most of you on Union County Water where you live, or most of you on wells? About half and half? Well, so I'm going to speak for just a moment to the people that drink Union County water instead of well water. Have you ever gone out in your neighborhood does anybody live on a cul-de-sac or have cul-de-sacs in their neighborhoods, and they have seen public works staff opening fire hydrants and shooting water out at the end of the cul-de-sac? Anybody ever seen that before? I'm seeing 4 nods around the table. Do you know what they're doing? This is where common sense takes over. They are actually purging dead water from the line where the residual chlorine content in that treated water has faded. Because fire departments love to say, well, if you've got a 900-foot long cul-de-sac, we need a hydrant at the end. Okay? The problem with that scenario is that water line dead ends. And a 6-inch diameter water line at the very end of the system, wherever the tank is, because usually it leaves the plant, goes into pressurizing the system, maybe into a tank, but it ultimately ends up on that cul-de-sac. You got a lot of water to drink in those last 10 houses. And you got to do it fast before that chlorine fades. Because if any of you ever notice where you might pick up odor in that water, when the chlorine fades to a certain point, bacteria can form, and bacteria will start at your faucets, because that's where you open and close, that's where air contacts that water for the very first time. And if that chlorine that's sitting, when you turn the faucet off, and the water that's sitting right there has lost its chlorine content, that oxygen is going to work with bacteria to defeat the treated water. So the reason those public works or utility people are out there blowing the hydrants off is they're going to kill about 80,000 gallons of water, get rid of it, kick it to the drainage system, kick it to the creeks, because the chlorine's faded. So I use 400 and 450 feet as a maximum length on cul-de-sacs. In this draft, I've got 400. It depends on your fire department. We can ask that question later. But most fire departments can roll out about 500 feet when they stop at a hydrant, okay, and drop at a hydrant, and then they take off with the truck down to the scene. And most of them can roll out about 500 feet of 4-inch fire hose, 3.5 or 4-inch fire hose, which is a typical large diameter fire hose that a pumper is going to be tapping into the hydrant to be able to put onto an attack, which is what they call fighting a fire, where they might have 2 smaller diameter hoses on different sides of a house or something like that. So that 400 feet is really about fire departments. Because if the hydrant's back at the corner, then we can drop our water line down to a 2-inch water line for that cul-de-sac street, and you won't ever see them blowing water out again. So you let your main line circulate your neighborhood, and your cul-de-sacs feed off of a smaller diameter pipe for domestic purposes, and fire flow is fought from a hydrant that's within 500 feet. Again, I'm not smart enough to do this the hard way. I try to use common sense. And I grew up in municipal water systems and civil engineering, designing municipal water systems, and I saw that as a problem. So your fire departments will like this a lot, okay? Plus, they're not hunting for a hydrant that's been blocked, because hydrants at intersections are usually easier to access for a fire department than a hydrant in a cul-de-sac where somebody might have parked in front of it, okay? So that's where that's coming from. So when you read 400, why in the world did Rick come up with 400? All the cul-de-sacs around town are half a mile long. Well, there are important reasons. There are important reasons. You might want to change that. You might want to, pardon me? So I wanted you to see that. Let's see, stubs, connectivity, water supply, stormwater, flood standards, buffer strips. All the fun stuff is in there, utilities, water sewer systems, all of that kind of stuff, and even provisions for septic and things of that nature are, you know, what we call on-site wastewater disposal are all spoken to in here. Now, why would you think that we would put that in the subdivision provisions, and that why would we not just let the health department at the county deal with septic systems? Well, I'll tell you why. Because sometimes in developing a subdivision, you may find that soil conditions in certain lots are suitable for construction, but not suitable for wastewater absorption or percolation. So they may say, well, we're going to over here in our common open space, we're going to use a community septic system, and these houses on this street are all going to pump to it. Well, we want that information on the plat, and we want to know that that's what they're doing, because if you don't have those individual force mains that are going to this community plot for septic reasons, if you don't have that appearing somewhere, then what's going to happen is somebody's going to sell their house, and the next buyer is going to come out, and they're going to plant a dogwood tree right where the lawyer named Murphy said don't plant it. And they're going to stick a shovel in the ground and find somebody's wastewater pressure line the hard way. So we're setting people up for success, not failure. So we want to see it on the plats. Now, I used to prohibit them from using off-site fields unless they abutted it. They were adjacent to it. So they weren't sending it up the street right away and things like that. And immediately after one particular town adopted that update, they went to their legislator, and miraculously that changed in Raleigh overnight. They thought it was being a little bit too oppressive on development. So I still require, show it. identify, that's why it says at the top of page 19, plat shall identify off-site wastewater system locations and show easements where any portion of said off-site wastewater system and/or utility line providing service to the lot extends over any portion of the lot other than the lot for which it is serving, basically. Meaning, if I have to run my private wastewater line, if they put it across the lot next door and then you buy the lot next door, you need to know it's out there. Because what was happening in that particular town, which is in Union County, was they were not recording anything. People didn't know. So people dug holes and found them by accident. So anyway, common sense again. So that is the subdivision standard section, 16.2, the second half. Sure.
Septic lines have to be permitted, though, so they have a recording of them at Union County.
I'm talking about only the line that might cross someone else's property. If I've got a service pump and it's not the percolation septic line, it's the force main lot that goes out to that remote lot up the street, if we're doing it off-site, or I'm sending it across my neighbor's lots, my line goes out across the next 4 people's lots to go to that site.
You're saying those aren't required to be recorded through the county?
No, but we will.
Okay.
Because if they have already gotten their final plat approved, okay, by the village, and they're ready to start the subdivision, and then they go to get a permit for a septic, and they say, well, you need to record an easement, is that easement going to show up on that master plat? No. It's going to show up as a separate recorded document, and it's probably going to have some words to the effect of a blanket easement across these 9 lots. Is that going to help you find where it is? That's right, the final plat for the subdivision needs to show the location. Duke Power, right? What kind of easement does Duke Power use to serve your house? It's called a blanket easement. Can any of you walk outside and point to where the line is underground between your meter and the street? Heck no. Can you go look at a final plat and find it? Heck no, because it's a blanket easement. That's what they'll record. That's what the county would record, is that there's some easement. You have permission. That's all they're looking for. I think it's more important to have the location shown accurately on a document so it can be identified, it can be found, it can be, it is communicated at least to the subsequent owners of those properties.
So is this a requirement by the land engineer whenever that plat is being
By
applied
the
for?
engineer that's submitting stuff to you here. By that-
Everything for development on that
That's right.
property?
It'll all show up on the final plat for the subdivision. If they're gonna go off-site, we want that shown. We don't want sewer easements on people's private property for public utility lines. We do have to allow them to cross other people's property. I did have it where you had to go up the road, you had to come out and go up the road. State said, stop, Rick, whoa. So we just say, well, fine, if you're gonna cross other people's yards with it, record it on the plat. So it's determinable, we can identify it. So anyway, that's 16, does that answer your question, Mr. Owens? Okay, so that's the standard side of 16. Before I go into the first part of 16, I want to call your attention back a few tabs to 13. So the stuff I just went through says that you got to have streets, you got to have pavement, you got to have curb and gutter or whatever we want them to have. You got to have all that stuff. But 13 actually gets into the design discussions about streets. And I want you to just know what 13 is. It's only 5.5 pages long, but it gets into the fundamentals, and it also points out where they need to find this information about things that are required as well. So you get these cross-references, so they don't miss something. Okay, so you're gonna see the details of the streets appear in 13. And it's going to talk about a manual, which you don't have yet, which will have street cross sections. It'll have all kinds, you've got a manual now.
Yeah,
And we can talk about how we want to incorporate
whether we're
them
going to
both.
change the manual or not change the manual. So it'll be referencing a manual, which could be your current manual, okay? All right. Design speeds and what they're posted, and things like when a developer, I don't know if y'all know at the planning board level what happens to a street when they finalize the construction of the street. But it goes, a petition or basically a letter from the developer will arrive at Hunter's office asking for the village to accept the street, right? Or do y'all do DOT? The town takes the street. So when they submit that, this ordinance will require that they request a 25-mile-per-hour posted speed limit in the subdivisions, okay? So design speed of 30 with a posted speed limit of 25 is what's being recommended for all new subdivision streets. You may decide you want them to be able to drive 55 in the subdivision. If so, I'm going to run now. But generally speaking, that's what's recommended now. And I did notice around the village, several speed limit signs that talked about subdivision, 25 miles per hour in the subdivision, things like that. So you're already on the right path there.
What about the size of the streets? Where's that?
That's going to be in that manual.
In the manual?
Yeah, the manual's going to define now, that's why I want to look at with Hunter and see if there's anything that is not working. If what you've got's great, we leave it alone. If it's not great, we fix it. But I recommend,
Firethorn's this big.
Yeah. And Marvin Creek is.
EDS is this big. Yeah. Don't do Firethorn.
Well, some of that was, some of the older neighborhoods are, they vary, and part of that is from, those were NCDOT streets prior. Most of our new, I think, it's a right-of-way of 50, and then minimum street width, or travel lanes are either 10 or 11 feet, so it'd be a 22-foot wide road, I think.
my recommendation, a street cross-section that will keep traffic calm, but has ample room for 2 cars to pass, and if there's a parked car, they can still pass, but not fast, okay? Is a 27-foot back-to-back, that's back of curb to back of curb, with a 2.5-foot or 30-inch curb and gutter cross-section, which gives you 22 feet of asphalt. But keep in mind, the concrete gutter is 2 feet on each side, so if a car does park in front of Hunter's house and I'm driving down the street, that 22 feet of asphalt is contrasting with the lighter colored concrete, which is what calms traffic down. What calms traffic down is not a speed limit sign that says 25. It's things that make it look like they need to slow down. That's playing with human nature. So you have actually a 26-foot wide face of curb to face of curb street that doesn't feel 26 feet wide. So it will calm subliminally. I like to play the psychological game. People ignore signs if they want to. But when you feel uncomfortable, when you're walking on ice, you pay attention, right? So that's the street cross-section in general that I recommend, but I also recommend a 60-foot right-of-way so that you can move your sidewalk back further. So if I'm standing on the sidewalk with my new granddaughter and I'm speaking to Mr. Jones here, and a car goes by, my granddaughter doesn't jump out, nor I jump out of our skin because it feels too close. So I recommend an 8-foot planter strip. Now you can play with your setbacks so you're not requiring more land for the development, but you're moving the sidewalk further from the street with the trees between the sidewalk and the street, and that gives you a much more pleasant looking, safer feeling, calming effect, all of the above.
Be any exceptions to the Marvin Heritage District, as far as the width of streets and for that corridor? Is there anything in place or going to be ordinance-wise for that? Because we had talked about that in the development committee about trying to control traffic in that area.
Right, now, there's different criteria for those types of sections. Those are in the manuals that I use. I'm just describing a conventional subdivision right now, and then we can get into more of that
Okay,
village
that's-
center or heritage district type
Gotcha.
of design criteria. But in my manual, I have on-street parking provisions. How does that work? If you've got parking in front of shops or stores inside of a little village or something like that, you may say, we don't want any of that. Well, it'll be in the draft, and then we can take it out, but so you can at least see. Remember, my strategy is to show you everything rather than show you some things and then try to describe others. You'll get to see all of that, so that you can, if you.
Floodgates are open now on Newtown because the new roundabout opened up. I'll just let you know, because
Right.
my renters over there said, let's see, the minimum speed is now 55 on Newtown, I guess, as far as what's going on.
You wouldn't recommend parked car, moving car, parked car.
No,
That's too big. You think
That's too big.
That's gonna be.
If you don't have the cars parked there, the moving cars will speed up.
Okay,
I
I get that. But
That's right. The average speed on a 4-lane interstate highway is slower than the average speed on an 8-lane interstate highway.
Wait, say that one more time?
The average actual travel speed, this is not speed limits, this is the way people drive. The average actual speed on a 4-lane interstate highway, 2 lanes each way, old school 85 or original phase of 485, all that. When you get out to 8 lanes, 4 in each direction, what happens as you approach the Charlotte region? The traffic picks up speed. They feel less inhibited, and they will just pick up speed, irregardless of whether they're in a 65 or a 70. I see that when you go from 70 miles per hour to 65 coming from Cabarrus into Mecklenburg County, not a single car slows down, because it still feels nice and wide and comfortable that you can roll at that pace and everything's okay. So signage and enforcement that goes with signage are actually less effective than using design to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So I don't recommend any large street cross sections that.
You do 3 cars, is that what your parked car, moving car?
Yeah, because you may, that's right. And people will think, and if 2 cars park across from each other, then there's room
it's
still to
really
get a fire truck through it, and somebody's gonna slow down. It happens all the time in my neighborhoods. I slow down, watch them, they slow down, watch me, and so we don't run over children or old people or even normal people. You know, we're accident-free.
But you wanna put a strip in between the sidewalk, which
8-foot planter strip,
8-foot plan, so you got
8
5-foot
feet of
sidewalk,
grass.
you're gonna do larger than 5-foot.
and then a 5-foot sidewalk.
Just a 5-foot?
Yeah, in a normal, we're talking about normal, regular subdivisions. Now, you might say along this stretch, we want to connect 2 greenways, so we want, on one side of the road, we want to have you do a 6-foot or an 8-foot because we're tying it in with something else. Or you might, in certain situations, because maybe you're following along the side of a creek, and so you've only got houses on one side of the road, you might eliminate the sidewalk on one side and go to a wider walk on one side, because you can shift the street in the middle of the right-of-way. You doesn't have to center that 60-foot right-of-way. You could move the street over, add more pedestrian to the side that has more demand for pedestrian traffic. Where the street might be, you might have homes on a hill, a street, then a natural area, a park or a creek or something like that. You can always do
But we're not gonna put
that.
it in here, though.
No, but that's something that can always be done at the review level. Okay? They can always exceed it, and it does speak to sidewalks when they're not required, when you get into those areas that I just described. So I've already spoken to it, so the option is in there. They will see that. If they've got development on one side and there's not gonna be development on the other side because of the topography, because of the natural buffers or whatever you've got with the creeks, that they can put the sidewalk on one side and not have it over here. Then you can do a wider sidewalk over there, and it all stays within the 60-foot right-of-way. Pardon me?
Cul-de-sacs never have sidewalks, right?
Yeah,
Do they?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you want,
Yeah, that's sidewalks and cul-de-sacs.
unless you want to encourage children to play in the street.
They play in the circle down at the.
And then you've got the
That's exactly where they play.
not the NBA.
Yeah.
Now, I'm
No,
not
that was the
refer,
point.
I'm not going to refer to the conventional, I'm not going to refer to the conventional NBA that most people are familiar with. I'm going to refer to the other NBA, the Neighborhood Basketball Association, which is what cul-de-sacs basically are designed for, and what have you. So, you know, one of those things that you've got to be careful with is when you are creating places where that's where this is going to happen, then you're going to have consequences with that. Because if you have children playing in a public street and you encourage it, then you may find yourselves named in somebody's lawsuit at some point. Doesn't mean you are necessarily responsible or liable or what have you, but you can almost always
Are
assume
you
you'll
saying
get named.
cul-de-sacs encourage kids to play in the street?
Yeah,
Okay. I mean,
yeah. Now, we can still do them.
Yeah.
They're discouraged and they're limited in scope in the draft that you have before you, and you may say, we don't like that, we can change that, and I can change it easy enough. I can make it suit what you want it to be. I'm just giving you the principles of urban design
No, I
and town
appreciate it.
planning and village planning that, that lead to the draft that you see here for you, okay? You may want to loosen up some of these standards, and that's fine. But I wanted to overview you where they come from and the foundation for them. In fact, you used to see signs that would say, slow children at play. A lot of the sheriffs and police chiefs in North Carolina back in the late 80s, early 90s, pushed hard for that to end, for them to say no outlet, not slow children playing. Because that's right, you'll still see some of those, but what that was doing is that their concern was it was encouraging play in the street, or it was somehow or another authorizing play in the street. Okay? And that probably came out of a case. So anyway, that's how 16's standards side and the 13's street-based infrastructure side come together. So now I want to go back to the first part of 16 for just a moment before we jump over to open space. The first part of 16 is about kind of those regulatory aspects of subdivision. Because believe it or not, we have to address some of these things based on the statutes. That first page actually goes into things that are exempt, and that list is from state statute, okay? Believe it or not, state statute lists them, but it only lists 5, and then it hides the 6th one somewhere else. I just go ahead and bring them together. On page 2, there's an item I want to point out at the top. These are fairly common questions that come up. If we sneak out the back over here and cut across the state line and get over to that Indian land area, right, we'll find this city of the sun, Sun City, right? Sun City is a planned development, top of page 2. Sun City is a planned development. By that type of thing, what the state does is they've created this way to take let's just pick a number. In Sun City's case, we'll try to be close. 500 acres, that is one piece of property if you're outside of the house, right? All the property is owned by Sun City. You own your house. My sister-in-law lives in not a Sun City, but a similar situation, and she doesn't own a doggone thing past the edge of her brick. But she owns her house, and she has to go across this common area to go anywhere. The street's in the common area. Her driveway is in the common area. Her walkway between her front door and her driveway are in the common area, right? That's the way a Sun City, that's a planned community. So you might have thousands of homes, and guess what? It is not a subdivision. Detached homes, and it is not a subdivision. A lot of ordinances actually leave that out, but that is an exception under the statutes of the state. So that provision right there is for somebody that comes in and wants to skirt your stuff because we want to catch them. We don't want them to do it because they're looking it up in the statutes and your ordinance is silent to it. We want it to be addressed in here, okay? So that's what that is, even if it's just a miniature version. My sister-in-law lives on a street with about 20-something units, 25, 30 units, something like that. That's it. So it's a planned development, one piece of property with about 30 units, 30 homes, a little street through the middle.
And do we allow those, or do we not have the option of excluding them?
They're single-family detached dwellings on one piece of property. And the state has a provision for that to be able to happen.
Except we do not allow more than one dwelling per acre.
But that's the whole thing, is that state statute's gonna trump what our ordinance, like, our ordinance cannot be
You
stronger than
can't
the state.
preempt
Yeah.
them. State preempts you.
Does the HOA then pay all that property tax to the village
Yeah,
and the
oh, yeah.
county?
Well,
you know,
no,
for all
no,
those
the
acres?
members pay the HOA, and
Well,
the
I
HOA
understand.
pays the property tax. But that's right, yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
you know,
right.
that property tax doesn't go away.
Oh, no, no, the property tax is
The
safe.
check's just written from a different account.
Yeah, you're gonna get a check from my sister-in-law Sue, and you're gonna get a check from the HOA where my sister-in-law Sue lives, in Hunters Creek in Greenwood, South Carolina.
So is that, it's generally considered 55-plus communities? Is that, you know?
Usually they are target market like that, because there's a like-mindedness that they're targeting. It could be 55-plus, it could be, 60, things like that, so, yeah. And that is the only thing, that is the only time where you can actually skirt, and that's why it's all common area, because it's in your bylaws and everything else, that gets around Fair Housing Act, right? And you can't get into whether somebody rents it or owns it. That's a Fair Housing Act no-no as well. So anyway, this goes into some boring stuff, no conveyance without approvals, things of that nature, which is obvious. You know, if we don't say it, it'll happen, but they're not supposed to be marketing lots that are not lots yet. Coming soon, they can say that, but they can't sell you something that hasn't been created, okay? So, and this spells all that out. This also goes into that, any attorneys on the board here? Handle any estates where you're dividing up assets and conveying things around? Well, this is to prevent them from just saying, well, we're just gonna cut the piece of property in half whichever way it goes and go record it. And then Hunter wakes up one day and he's got this weird piece of property that's been cut in half all of a sudden. This speaks to that, consistent with the way the general statutes do. So a lot of the statutes are brought home here to make sure it's clear for those people that are working in your area, so things don't happen that shouldn't have happened, okay?
So let's go back just for a second. As we said, Plant City, that, or Fair Housing Act, has no right.
Fair housing, that's the only kind of exemption that they've got is, and I'm not an expert in how they get around the Fair Housing Act, because Fair Housing Act is not supposed to discriminate against you based on the blah, 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 and age, right? But yet they can do these 55-plus communities, and there's certain criteria they have to meet in order to satisfy that. So they create the way I would equate, and kind of dumbing it down for my own purposes, the way I would equate it is it's not a rest home, but it's getting there. And so somehow or another, they allow you a way to get around. It might be something interesting to look up as to how is it that they skirt Fair Housing Act and legitimize age-restricted communities. Okay?
Sorry, this is
I
slightly
try
off.
not to ponder things that the state has already told me I have to do. I don't need to know why they do it. I just know that they did it.
And I apologize for kind of going off track just a little bit, but
Yeah.
I haven't read the Fair Housing Act. Does it state that what is the discrimination about? Like rent versus own, but like.
Selling, ownership, all that sort of thing. So
So if a neighborhood, if like a subdivision were to be built,
right.
the developer of the subdivision could say, these are all rental houses. And Marvin could say, we have no.
We don't get into ownership and rental.
It's the whole issue with like Barcroft.
Say that again?
Barcroft was a single-family residential subdivision. It just so happened that American Homes for Rent purchased the development, built the houses, and they rent all the houses out. Can't control that.
And that's because of the Fair Housing Act.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a developer that's taking advantage of the Fair Housing Act. Because if that act did not do that, then a lot of cities a lot of villages, towns used to try to determine or control ownership versus rental of housing. And that failed miserably when when the attempts were made to defend it, once the Fair Housing Act was passed.
So how are HOAs standing on trying to control the percentage of rentals?
Because in an HOA, it is a contract.
No, I'm saying, I know HOAs that are saying you may not rent, or like there can only be a certain amount
Right.
of rentals, or like they try and like.
They can do that because they are entering into a contract with the buyer. When you buy a property that is subjected to CCRs, the covenants, conditions, restrictions, you are agreeing to those. So you and the other parties to that agreement, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you a totally legal interpretation here, but I can tell you what my understanding is that you're entering into an agreement with other like-minded persons that you are going to restrict or limit or agree to limit certain types of housing transactions like rentals, okay? But now for a town, a municipality, a unit of government to say, well, you can't do rentals and you can do rentals, or you have to do rentals, or you have to do sales, is overstepping that boundary. So it has to stay out of our local law, which is what an ordinance is. But those people can go out and agree that they're not going to rent but so many or sell so many or whatever they want to do. So
It still feels like the state
it's a bit
statute
hypocritical.
would still override that. I mean, if state statute overrides anything we do.
The act restricts governmental agencies from that, okay? And they also probably restrict agents and others from doing certain things under the Fair Housing Act. I'm not an expert on Fair Housing
Absolutely.
Act.
Yes.
Okay,
but-
so Fair Housing Act is really only geared towards government entities.
For the most part, it prohibits us from setting that. So let's say we have a district where apartments and condominiums, this is just an example, where apartments and condominiums are both considered multifamily, but one is set up such that it can be demised or sold off in pieces. Okay, so you're buying this unit or that unit or the other unit, and there's all this language to address responsibilities for common and limited common and things like that, okay? Whereas an apartment complex isn't going to fool with all that paperwork because one owner and everybody that lives there pays rent to that owner. From a land use standpoint, we cannot segregate those into two different categories. We call it all multifamily. Whether you can buy the unit, whether you can't buy the unit is actually none of our business, according to the Fair Housing Act.
So I have a question because I actually know people who are doing this. They're buying larger houses.
Houses and they're renting out rooms.
They're
I was
renting out.
just about to bring that up because I found out a couple of weeks ago, I had an
It is
investor
a form of
contact me.
affordable housing, especially,
Right.
it's great for younger people.
Exactly. And it's happening up in Charlotte-Mecklenburg.
Yep, so like, you know, I don't know if it would make a lot of sense here in Marvin because the housing prices are so high, but it is possible if, you know, if there are young executives that want to live in Marvin, but they can't, you know, they don't have families and double income.
And Rick, correct me, because I know where you're going with this, but there's a couple things that kind of didn't self-regulate and/or that we have tools in our ordinance on that. One is the term single-family versus multifamily.
Correct.
It's a single-family dwelling, meaning that a single family resides there. Doesn't matter if it's owned or rented by, but it's typically owned or rented by a family.
Doesn't matter in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. They want more housing, so they're
I know, but
going
I'm
to
saying,
allow that.
I'm saying per our ordinance.
Right.
If somebody, and then the other thing is that if then somebody was renting out individual rooms, and that kind of thing gets defined as a boarding house to an extent, or could, like, so there's other uses or defined that we could use to, that self-regulate that self, but the actual renting of a home versus owning, we can't regulate. That's where the, yeah.
And I get that. I'm more concerned about, you know, if someone were to come in and buy a large home, rent out 5 rooms to 5 individuals who are not, you know, so it becomes, a single-family dwelling now becomes a multi.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a
That's right.
multi-family dwelling.
But we wouldn't allow multifamily, so they wouldn't be allowed to do that.
If we interpret it based on definition that it's multifamily, not single-family, then we can regulate that. The ever increasingly touchy side of that whole side of our work that we do is the definition of family has become more complicated. It used to be quite simple. It was persons living in a household that were related by blood or marriage. That was the end of it. And that started eroding away from being the foundation of the definition of family really in the 80s, when you had more living together. You know, even though it might be a couple or something like that, you had a lot more of that, and what had not been a big question mark became a big question mark. And so now what we're saying is related by blood or marriage, or up to 3 adult individuals, unrelated individuals inhabiting a single dwelling. So, and the reason I use 3 is because let's say you've got somebody's old 1960s, you know, 1,900 square foot, 3-bedroom brick, single-story ranch or whatever, and you got 3 friends sharing it. So is that multifamily or is that roommates?
Well, but my question really is because in these situations, there are multiple leases. So you would not assume a family would have multiple.
There's the
This is
foundation right there.
Multiple individual leases.
Right.
There's no families or
Right.
anything involved.
What I'm getting at, though, is that's the kind of thing that when we have to make a determination, what's called an administrative determination, we have to gather information. If we gather information because we've received a complaint or there is even an inquiry from a property owner, and they say, well, we're going to rent out individual rooms, well, you're going to have separate contracts, leases, whatever you want to call them, for that arrangement, that then removes it from single family and pushes it into one of 2 categories. It's either lodging or it's multifamily. And depending on their arrangement, and I was on the phone this morning at length on this very subject with a town up in the mountains, that is, all the old houses close into their downtown are now being rented out that way as individual people. You got 5 or 6.
How can you call it multifamily when it's individuals and there's no families?
That's right. So it's multi-individual.
I know.
Right. It's
I'm
right.
saying that could be a case.
It gets real hairy real quick, and so the art of interpretation becomes very important. That's why your Board of Adjustment is critical too, because when we make an interpretation that these 3 individuals, that each are renting a room in this house is multifamily, even though it's a 1-member family, 1 person, that constitutes that unit, like in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's really
Or a studio.
or a studio. or a tiny home, or whatever the case may be. So it's complex. It's complex.
A prime example is Boone had provisions in their ordinance that regulated this because college town, single-family homes being rented out to multiple college students, they had that terminology in there of, I think it was no more than 3 blood-related in a single unit. And all that kind of had to change. And then to your point, what then they started doing was that one person owns a home, it's one lease with all 4 people or 5 people living on it, but it's just one agreement. So that was kind of the workaround that they kind of got into.
That's the way my eldest son did it at Chapel Hill. He was the entrepreneur, and he spent the first 2 years in off-campus student housing there beside I forgot what it was called, something, those tall buildings right beside Chapel Hill. And then his junior and senior year, he found a nice 3-bedroom ranch with about 1,800 square feet in it in a neighborhood about 2 blocks from campus. And he got 5 or 6 of his friends to all pay him, so he lived free.
Brilliant.
And you know, and he did that in a neighborhood. And so they had their couch on the roof and everything. I mean, they did the whole student experience. And the landlord loved it because the landlord was hauling in $4,000 a month on a house that,
And
you
his
know.
neighbors then hated it, so.
Oh, yeah, the neighbors hated it.
I mean,
But that's what happens in college towns.
My last question about this, because like I don't even know how we would know, except that if you've got, you know, a house that maybe has 4 or 5 bedrooms in it, and someone has come in and leased the bedrooms to individuals with 4 or 5 different leases, I would imagine the cars going in and
That's right.
out. And like, so, like, I know that with a septic system, in order to get approved for septic, you know, you have the number of bathrooms or bedrooms in your home has to match the size of the septic field. So
Right.
like, and I know we talked about parking a little bit the last time.
They want cul-de-sacs. That's what they want, I'm just telling you, for those properties.
Okay, no more cul-de-sacs then. No.
So,
But I mean, like, how is that, you know, you can only have, I know we talked about that, but like, you know, you have to, if you have garage, it's like you have to have enough space for 2 cars on a pad, and then maybe, you know, so how do you deal with this?
What we do is we list, and when we get to Article 8, when we get into the districts, you're going to discover a very robust use table that goes into a lot of different scenarios for residential types of activities and things that are related to it. So you're going to learn a little bit about things like what are referred to in customary terms, and I don't like trying to stick with the trendy terms. I try to stick to things that have a foundation in them, like a tourist home, a bed and breakfast, et cetera, and even Airbnb, just to use a good example, is a trendy thing, a modern thing, and it's not a land use. Airbnb is not a land use. It's an app for booking and paying and finding and locating and what have you. So it is not a use or activity. So we don't restrict Airbnb. What we look at is, and we take it apart. We have to take this nutshell apart. That's what the people in our roles have to do. Let's say that you've got 5 rooms and you've got all these people and you've got, you know, these booked and those booked and those booked, and they don't know each other. They came from different places and they're here for a reason, whatever it is. Might be a friend's wedding, or it could be an event, or it could just be an interesting place. Guess what that is? That's a bed and breakfast or a lodge. That's not a Airbnb. That has become something else. So we may have to interpret that you might have found it on Airbnb, but it is actually a B&B or a lodging of some sort. Now let's suppose that it is this incidental thing, and I made a room available because we were having the Olympics in Charlotte, and
You
a
wouldn't make
couple
quick
from
20
Sweden came because their daughter was competing, and they came from Sweden, and they spent 2 weeks, and they paid us to use our guest room. Now, is that really a lodge or a bed and breakfast, or is that no different than if my sister-in-law stays for 2 weeks and she leaves some money on the table because she knows she's been eating all of our groceries? You follow me? So there's this big gray area between somebody staying in the guest room and we got a business thing going. See what I mean? And so what we actually have to do, if we write ourselves into two boxes, we have to make doggone sure we didn't leave anything gray in the middle, okay? So what I like to do is have enough stuff in my use table to where when we are taking apart what we found that they've got this going on, this is happening, and this is happening. Now, let's look at these uses and see which one we're gonna drop. We're gonna drop it on this one. This is what our determination is. Is that okay, or is that a violation? And that's where the use table really will come in, and having a robust use table. I'm talking about spreadsheets, front and back, for 10 pages, just listing uses. And you're gonna say, wow, we don't even want a lot of this in town. Well, if you don't individualize them, you can't control them as well, okay? Because then we have to round off. If we just say single family, motel, hotel, bed and breakfast, we've
They're
got
more
a
there
lot
to
of gray.
identify, not
We
to
got a lot of
approve.
gray in those lines in between those 2 or 3 categories. So I use a very robust list of categories, predominantly for enforcement purposes, okay? And you'll see that as we get closer to districts. So we're swirling around. This is kind of like Dorothy's Yellow Brick Road right there at the end or at the beginning where she first started out. And we're sort of swirling back the other way towards the middle, which is going to be the districts, how the districts come into play, and how the things that support those districts come into play. So that's the first part of 16. This last part is quite simple. It's Article 21. In Article 21, open space, I just love this little article. It gets into what qualifies and doesn't qualify, because if you're not careful, you'll only get unusable open space. Remember, we talked earlier about floodplains and wetlands and stream buffers and all that, and that's wonderful and great and nice to have in the open space, and to have that in an area that's not just cutting through people's lots or whatever. But some of the open space needs to be functional open space for humans, not just natural areas. And so if you really start over on end of page 3, and I'm going to move across it very quickly, you'll see we get into types of open space. Squares, turning the page, parks, forecourts, plazas, greenways. Anybody been to London before? Okay. What do you see there? You see a lot of little plazas, parks, forecourts, things of that nature. Well, you actually can do those in subdivision type neighborhoods too, detached neighborhoods as well. And the point is to bring functional, usable open space to close proximity or a reasonable proximity of folks in the neighborhood. And we use that. I don't know if anybody caught this, but when we passed through 13 earlier, there was this thing called terminating a vista. And you're going to get I was in school in the mid-1900s, so we called them slideshows, film strips. We're going to do a film strip or a slideshow for you. It's really, believe it, it's actually, PowerPoint, but that's not my favorite term. But it will show a lot of images of how these things work together in real-world scenarios, and how you terminate vistas with things that might include open space. And you'll notice over on page 6 where we get into that natural open space that I was describing a little while ago, where along one side of the road you might have property that gets put into some open space because it's got the creek running through it and things of that nature. But this gets into all the formulas and everything else for what qualifies and doesn't qualify, and when it doesn't make sense, and what they do if it doesn't make sense. And so I'll leave that for your enjoyment. It's really not rocket science, but it does bring the open space into the context of the conversation, the qualitative side of that open space. And I'm going to show you, in my neighborhood, between myself and the clubhouse, is 2 blocks. I live a full 2 blocks from the clubhouse. And there are 9, counting the clubhouse property, 9 common areas between my house and the clubhouse. Some no larger than this pocket right in front of us right now, where you've got a cluster of mailboxes and it's a little wedge where a curve came around. And instead of just throwing all that land into the last lot with that house on it, the cluster boxes went in this, 2 cluster boxes, not 50 of them. The Postal Service wants us to put all the cluster boxes in one place right at the entrance and create a big parking lot for them and all that. No, we do the cluster boxes spread through the neighborhood. Okay? Because they're moving away from curbside and front door deliveries. So we are conscientious about how we select our open space, and we factor that into the area, and that adds a very nice amenity throughout. You might have a few plantings around that cluster of mailboxes. You might have a cross-block walk, which is what I have beside me. So I live on a corner lot, if you will, except there's not a street beside me. There's a greenway beside me. So it's a T intersection of streets, and I live on the opposite side, and a greenway actually continues on. So you can come up that street and then follow a greenway all the way for 4 or 5 blocks to a church, and all you do is cross a street. Cross streets. You're in the middle of the block, mid-block pedestrian corridor. Very popular, very good for passive defense, and we'll get into those discussions later. Passive defenses are things that happen by you outsmarting the criminal mind by making things a little less easy for them to control the situation, or a little less easy for them to be able to size up the full situation, or to be able to find a way to get into your space without being detected. In planning, it's called CPTED, which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And it's a real thing. Have you done any CPTED? Have you ever done any CPTED training? It's really pretty good. Well, unfortunately, a lot of them are not, actually. So anyway, that's the introduction of the big 3 for the BLT, for the bacon, lettuce, and tomato of land use and planning and zoning and things of that nature. And I think that I've laid out in those big 3 that there's really 4 buckets, 16 having 2 buckets, the more legally side and the more design-y side.
Can I ask a quick question about with the differentiating open space that is usable and open space that are wetlands, those types of things, water retention. When developers are calculating the total acreage that they have to develop, like the 1 house per acre, if they're going to do a conservation, are they allowed to include those what did you call them? Human utilization. I mean, it was like, are they allowed to include those areas that are just going to exist regardless as?
The leftovers.
Right, as their open space.
Are you asking that as in our current ordinance, or now, or in this?
I mean, in this next rendition.
In the
Are
new
you going
one-
to make them included, like, will they get to say, oh, this 2 acres of wetland area that we can't actually even build on, we're going to count that as our overall acreage so that we can get more homes in a
Correct.
Yeah.
Your overall densities are based on gross. So if you've got street right-of-ways and open space and everything else. But that's one side of the puzzle. Then your minimum dimensional standards, like lot sizes, will put the brakes on how far down you can go. So let's say that you're saying one per acre, and you've got 20% of the acreage is unusable for homes, so they can't cram all of that into the other part unless they can still meet those minimum lot sizes. So those minimum lot sizes will create a floor
Like a
that they
balance.
can't, a ceiling that they cannot exceed. So they might only get 85% of what is eligible because the site they've chosen has a lot of constraints. Okay, so when we say how much open space, if we say some number like 5%, just to pick a percentage of a subdivision, or 7.5% of a subdivision has to be open space, but you've got 20% of it in floodplain and streams and all that, then their issue's not gonna be the 5 or 7. They're gonna far exceed that. But what they're gonna find is that a significant part of what they are required to do, that 5 or 7, can't just be the floodplain. It's gotta come up into the neighborhood too. So what this does kind of in a, I don't wanna call it a backdoor kind of way, but it is kind of a backdoor kind of way, is it separates out the site suitability of different properties. So let's say we've got 100 acres over here that has very limited environmentally sensitive areas. Maybe a little stream buffer crosses one corner of it or something like that. And over here, we've got 100 acres, and it's got 25 acres of floodplain on it. Those properties are not created equal. They both get the same density privilege, for example, a unit per acre or whatever the measure is, but if it won't work, it won't work. So but if you're clear about that up front, to where they can look at the information clearly up front and they can make a decision about purchasing that property because they know what their yield is, they know what their cash flow is going to be, they know what they can determine what their development costs are going to be, then they may go to the seller and say, you know, I'll pay you your asking price for 80 acres, but I'll pay you 10% of that price for the other 20 because I can't do anything with it.
So what
And
is your,
so it sort of makes everything a little more realistic.
yeah, what is your opinion then on the landowner that purchases that 100 acres with the 25% wetlands or, you know, unusable, unbuildable, and then they come to us asking for reduced setbacks because they have a hardship, because they can't build on?
That's not a hardship.
I feel like we've gotten that, though.
That's not a hardship. That's there already.
You're mixing that up with like a variance compared to a variance in the view shed, which the variance in the view shed is not like a variance. It's the term variance, but that terminology in our current ordinance is basically stating that a developer can ask to reduce the view shed if there is a hardship, but it's like I said, it's not an actual variance granting, like a Board of Adjustment variance. Council can just grant that the buffer be reduced. Our view shed buffer ordinance, in my opinion, was already like extra, but, so.
It basically, it will do a lot more to steer development towards the property that has what we refer to as carrying capacity. It can support development and to relieve pressure on areas that really don't. My saying, and you all know politically where I stand, I'm right smack in the middle of the number line at 0. Okay, so this is not a political statement, but it basically uses common sense to say in the areas that really are not suitable for design, just leave them alone because you can't fight Mother Nature. You will either A, lose, or you will B, go broke trying. And if you are able to finagle Mother Nature in round one and get past the planning process and get your plat recorded, whoever comes out, whoever you tag in that match and they come out to fight round two is going to be the loser. They're the ones that are going to own the home and find out later that they can't do this or they can't do that, or it would cost a lot of money to try to put a building addition on where it goes out into a floodplain. And they found out then that they had to have all these additional costs associated with it. So the point is let's set people up for success up front and recognize that the property is not always created equal. Configurations can affect it, access can affect it, topography and environmental obstacles can affect it, and it is what it is. So the tree cutters and the tree huggers all kind of get what they're after in the end is my philosophy. And there's not a loser. You don't want, when you start doing variances to give people more yield because of floodplains and things of that nature, you're picking a winner on that equation, you know, and when you pick a winner, that means there's now going to be a loser. You really need to be careful with that. You need to be careful with that. The variance is when they can't utilize that property without some kind of break, which usually means a reduction in a setback. You can't vary use of land. You can't vary a land use. And it could be argued that allowing development in an area or additional development to replace property that is undevelopable is a change in the use of the land that you are developing. You could also be argued that it is a transfer of development rights which are only allowed under one circumstance under the state of North Carolina's system, and that's when there's a highway condemnation or acquisition for a highway right-of-way. You can transfer that density to another portion of the property or another property you own. Okay? So there are transfer development rights issues, there are varying uses related issues, and things of that nature that, depending on the situation, stand in the way really of doing what you're doing if you're granting variances. That's a battle that could be lost if it were challenged. So I know I've said a lot and I've about run out of talk here, so I need some water. And any other questions for me? This has been good debate, good discussion. Y'all always get your money's worth out of my hide, I can assure you that. I usually leave here about mentally exhausted. Good questions.
Are there any examples of the SEPDED in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg and Union County developments?
Yeah, because I know well, I can't point to one in particular, but I can point to some where you would wish there was.
Any project, any
Yeah.
housing project?
It's one of those things where you wouldn't know it if I sent you to it. But just think of it this way as, you ever walked out of a building, maybe after dark, and it felt a little unnerving because there were maybe some unlit areas or some bushes that had been allowed to just get way bigger than they really should right at that corner or something like that, where it creates opportunities for criminal intent or criminal mind to hide or disguise their presence or something of that nature. Another example of bad SEPTED or the lack of SEPTED or has anybody ever watched television and seen some kind of store video that was showing the perpetrator and you couldn't make, all you could tell is that it was possibly a human, but as far as recognizing them, it would have been impossible. Well, that's an example of where SEPTED was let down. SEPTED takes into account the quality of the lighting, and whether that light creates a light pollution or not is a slightly separate matter, but what is the quality of the lighting in the parking lot or in an area? You know, so I can point to examples where SEPTED was omitted. Now, have you ever been someplace where it just felt great? It was just awesome. Then chances are the architect was taking that into account. Architecture and town planning both are the sort of the areas that blend into. In fact, you're an architect, right? Did y'all study SEPTED? Okay. Okay. Well, maybe your professors didn't know about it. And it's a relatively new thing in the last 5 years or so, but yeah. But it's something that I try to take into account, and I like to encourage the people that are reviewing plans to look at that, because it's almost impossible to codify that because you don't know exactly what a bush might be at a corner of the sidewalk right near the corner of the parking deck entrance on the end of the building away from the end of the deck away from the main building. You know, it could be something fairly simple.
And it's very different when, like what the two of us experience when we get out of our cars at night is very different than the rest of the gentlemen in this room's experience, because we're targeted much
That's right.
more than, so,
That's
you know.
exactly right.
That's why I believe that women should always be at the table, because we have a different viewpoint. and
Absolutely.
You might not think about, because none of us have the same experiences.
And
so-
that is the critical part of plan review processes too, and planning boards being involved in the site plan review at an input level. So you're not voting necessarily on a site plan, but these major site plans would come to you, not somebody's tool shed in the backyard, but these major site plans would come to you as a group to collect your input. And I write that into my processes on different types or different levels, subdivisions or commercial developments of a certain scale or size or something like that. So, and because that is absolutely correct. And I try to, also when I'm training staff, to get people to stop looking at it from who you are. I'm gonna show you something.
On how you would use
This
the-
is what a upper middle-aged OWG looks like. You might know what an OWG is?
Old white.
Older way.
And I can't help it. I really
You were born that way.
You grew, no, he grew into
You
it.
grew into it, yeah. I was just joking anyway.
But what I try to do, I call it getting small as well. When I'm reviewing site plans and things of that nature, I try to put myself into that plan at that scale, not just look at this drawing and how pretty it is or whatever. And I also try to step out of my profile. As an upper middle age, as a white, or as a male, whatever the case might be, I try to step out of that and try to imagine. I'm not an expert at understanding
some of those things are happening a lot here.
Yes, if we had any questions, I got one question. I'll try to make it brief. I'm just curious if
Because
you
Michael
could.
Bell wants to go home, so you need to
I
wrap it
know,
up.
I
I haven't
know.
said anything.
If you could
always
explain.
like-
I haven't said anything, you pick
All right, let me get this. If you could explain on page 16.9, 16.2-3C. Do you remember that one?
Not off the top of my head.
It's regarding subdivision standards and frontage. Frontage.
What, the-
Yep. We've got some exceptions to frontage. But frontage is typically a big deal when you're talking about conveying real property. And I'm gonna leave the Sun Cities and that plan development thing where you've got this large common ownership and everything of the network, and I'm gonna talk about it as if it's a individual lot that you're creating. When you're creating an individual lot and you don't address frontage, you are setting the timer on the time bomb. Because while the current owner and current parties might all be okay with a handshake deal, something might go wrong somewhere. And my only situation, it wasn't a case, it turned into a case, but not a zoning case, that's for sure, where someone actually died that I'm aware of, was a murder. And it was over that topic. And so I take it very, very seriously. So upper middle-aged lady found herself in prison, and her daughter found herself in shock because her husband was killed. The mother-in-law shot the son-in-law over this topic, and I was blown away. While you might sell me an acre and sell it over here and say, sure, you can use the driveway, you can just build your house back there and all that stuff, that's great. But one day, I'm gonna sell, or you're gonna sell, or I'm gonna die, or you're gonna die, or one of us is gonna get mad at the other one, or one of us is gonna go bankrupt and lose in foreclosure. Something's gonna change. I'm not gonna, what is it to say? I'll never sell. Well, you might not, but your heirs might sell it for you. If you don't have standards for frontage, you are creating a nightmare down the road. So I use a minimum amount of frontage, I use a minimum amount of access to a public street if it's a straight-up conveyance. The only time you might deviate away from that is where you've got that planned unit development thing, where you've got a very robust set of covenants and everything else, where everybody's participating and they agree that they don't have frontage. Now, we might share a driveway, we might cut across your property to get to both my house and your house, but if I've got frontage to the road and you get mad at me, I still have a point at which I can put in my own doggone driveway. That's what killed this young man. He
But
went
you're
to
talking
get
about
his
flag
stuff.
lots, right?
He went to get his stuff,
Flag lots?
and
Flag
his
lots.
mother-in-law put a cable up and locked it. And he went to get his stuff and was offended by this, and he cut the cable to go get his stuff out of his home.
Hmm.
So, his mother-in-law killed him in that yard in front of that cable. Wow. So, what if and all that stuff, you know, we talk about what ifs, but I can tell you, I've now seen it all. I've now seen it all. When that happened, I no longer took frontage lightly, because when you block somebody from their property or some deal changes, you got trouble on your hands. So unless you've got that really covered in legal documents, my suggestion is, don't let people create lots that don't have
Right.
frontage resolved.
Are you the one producing the Village of Marvin's private drive standards?
Am I going to?
Yes.
Yeah, y'all had asked me to for private roads, private streets, and
Right.
all that stuff, and I'll be doing that, and that'll go in that Article 2.
Okay.
It won't be, it'll be, basically there'll be driveways, is what the language will be. When they're private, they're driveways. Now, do I recommend it? Heck no. Because usually those gates swing open, and great right now, it's only been there 10 or 15 years, and everything is wonderful, but is it always going to be that way? Do you know it's always going to be that way? So the best thing you can do is have them build the street properly. Then the option is there. They can keep it gated, or they can abandon the gating, because they might have a reason to. And I've seen a lot of neighborhoods that do that. Now, I've also noticed a lot of neighborhoods here that have nice private systems, and I've seen some that say no trespassing, but the road's open and there's no gate. And how do you know, other than a no trespassing sign, and I don't remember the name of the subdivision, but how do you know with a no trespassing sign, am I on a public street or am I not on a public street? You know, to me, they need to do a little bit more than that. No trespassing, and yet it just flows. There's no gate, there's no defining moment there. Is that no trespassing sign for the lot there beside that entrance? Or is it for the entrance, you know?
There's a lot of things regarding when you sell properties, having public maintenance agreements. Not having public maintenance agreements is like a little bit of can of worms in some different subdivisions.
My recommendation is if you're going to have private streets, that we have some fairly robust language for those HOAs to include. We can't dictate necessarily HOAs, but we might say to an HOA, you need to cover these issues when we're doing a development agreement with them, or something like that. But we can't necessarily control HOAs. But one of the things that is critical when you've got private streets is that the HOA actually has, what is that called? Basically, it's an asset management study where they look at various assets that the HOA has.
Reserve study? Reserve study?
Yeah, reserve study, that's it. I was president of my HOA a couple different times, and we had reserve studies and all that stuff. And that reserve study sets aside the funds to replace the roof on the clubhouse at 30 years, and to redo the pool pumps at 8 years, and whatever else you gotta do, resurface the tennis courts, or the, whatever you've got, or the volleyball net, or whatever you've got, and set aside funds for resurfacing the street. Okay? But if that street is not built to the proper public street standard up front, then it will deteriorate faster, and they may not know that. So that's why I say in my standard language that private streets shall be built to public street standard. That way, I know that this street will hold a garbage truck or a fire truck, but this street might not. You know, I think it should be that both streets can handle that garbage truck or whatever it is.
I'm on neighborhood street with.
It's too late for you. It's already there. It's too late for you. It's already there.
Well, there's road.
Ours is about to get repaved though, because we made a deal.
Are you there with Marvin?
Got a nice entranceway now.
Yeah, you sure do. You're the best interest in Marvin.
Except it doesn't say that it's private. It doesn't say that it's a private road, so that's, yeah. We're getting a lot of traffic down our road now, so, because we don't have a gate. But the flag, I probably have some questions about flag lots, but we'll ask the next time we see each other, so. Thank you,
I
sir.
don't know if my brain's got much left. I spent all day today here getting to know the neighborhoods. I can't quote names of streets and all that, but I've seen it all now.
Well, thank you.
I did find the blue collar house. There was one.
The blue collar house?
Yeah, a house here that's worth less than $1 million or something.
Come on now, you're exaggerating.
It's backed up to me.
Was that your house?
That's where it is.
No,
The
I
abandoned
did.
house.
It was really good because I've been needing to spend more time in the community, and I really got to do that today, and get a feel for everywhere and everything. So yeah, it helped me a lot.
Well, at least you,
You got a lot of good stuff going on here too.
and at
Should be
least you
very proud.
didn't have to
I
deal
cannot
with
let
a
my
lot of
wife come
construction.
down here or I'll go broke instantly.
What was up?
I can't encourage my wife to come down here and visit anything, or else I'll be broke the next day. Yeah.
It's, yeah, ain't cheap.
She's welcome anytime.
Said a
know-
realtor, said a
Yeah,
realtor.
no, so- I hear you.
Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate,
Thank
we
you very
appreciate
much.
And
your,
I believe our next meeting is November the 21st, a Tuesday. Okay.
that's Thanksgiving week?
Thanksgiving week.
Yeah.
I already know I'm not here.
Is anyone else not going to be here? I mean,
That's the week before.
Is it?
oh, it is?
Yeah. Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I thought that was the week before.
Just got
Do
my
we
first
want-
Airbnb booking in that week.
Do we want to move it to the 16th?
Let me see if I can do that. I mean, 'cause I'm not sure.
Is anyone not going to be in town besides Mike? I mean, if this is going to be an issue for a lot of people. Okay. Are you in town?
Oh, yeah, that is the week of Thanksgiving. November. Boy, Thanksgiving's early this year, 23rd.
Yeah, I'll be here as well.
So,
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's my wife's meeting. Never mind.
It looks like, besides, Mike is definitely gone.
I can't do it
Your
the week
question mark.
before.
We're all here. John, are you?
Could we do it the Tuesday
Here.
after?
I
Okay, so it
cannot
looks like
do it the week before. I cannot do it the week of the 13th.
What about the 28th?
Well, it looks like the rest, it looks like Mike might be the only one that cannot join that week, and we have one.
I can do the 28th. I'm just answering their questions. I can do the 28th.
Let's just keep it the 21st then. And if you are able, like, if you're in a position where you can join by,
If Thanksgiving doesn't happen.
on the 21st,
Yeah, it's Tuesday night.
you got days until you're supposed to eat turkey and stuff yourself. You could, if you need to, you could come in by Zoom or WebEx or whatever we do.
Certainly join. You'll have to approve it, correct? Isn't that the way it works?
I'm fine for the 21st for what it's worth.
Thank you, Bob. All right, why don't we keep it the 21st? Let's just,
Okay, thank you
don't
all.
fix it being broke. Okay. Thank you, have a
Take care.
great one.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, same to you.
Planners update,
Nothing to report?
great. Going around the table? Ken? What was that?
There were no actions.
Oh, yeah, no action items.
Thank you very much, staff, and welcome to the team.
Yeah, I would actually like an announcement, like what are we,
Yes.
what is here? Like,
Oh, yeah, she went from intern to planning assistant. So we hired for part-time help, so she's doing communications. She's, so we,
they make a lovely couple.
You can continue the Marvin wise for us, right? That's good stuff. I like that.
That's the newsletter.
But yeah.
She's like, what is that? That's the newsletter.
so she's here, and we'll continue on and potentially, we'll see if this turns in, I mean, from a budget standpoint of potentially having full-time as the assistant, but,
There you go.
but yeah, for right now, I mean, it's,
She should be doing enforcement.
She might be my deputy clerk next year, so.
There you go.
Oh.
but other than that, that's all I got.
All right, well, congratulations. Welcome aboard.
I think a congratulations to the Village of Marvin for getting the most important roundabout completed. That was the one everybody wanted, that was the one that took the longest. Congratulations to
It was
everybody.
the most heated.
It moved very nicely today.
I only got one flat tire, only one.
All right, so,
I tell you, they definitely look like they designed it to slow traffic down.
Yeah, it slows.
that little curve there? Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me
I was
tell you
gonna
though,
say, that could've
it's
made this-
moving. It is moving. Now, I don't think people realize it's open yet.
No.
Well, no, not, I mean, like, even at 6 o'clock, there was, I went around it, no one was there at 6 o'clock.
On Saturday, when they opened it, I was over at this house, and I swear, all of a sudden I was like going,
So people are still lining up on Morgan School Road, you turn left onto Joe Garner. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
I've also gotten my first official complaint that people are driving too fast through the new roundabout. It's just like, one set of complaints has been resolved and a new set has been.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll give you
yeah.
another official one. They are, especially to the roundabout as well. on North Newtown.
Well, they're going too fast on the roundabout, and
Well, sorry,
they're doing
here.
10 miles an hour below the speed limit on Marvin.
There's some people that.
10 miles an hour. No, on Marvin Road, from Firethorn all the way to Johnson Road,
Do you have any
10 miles under the speed limit.
No, that's unacceptable.
move to adjourn?
I second.
All in favor? Aye. So moved. Peace out, people. Thank you, guys.
Good night, all.
Night.